ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast to coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's time for Inside Analysis. Your host, Eric Kavanaugh, here. And folks, I'm very pleased to have an industry visionary on the call today. We're going to be talking to Justin Borgman. He is the co founder and CEO of a company called Starburst, and they are shaking up the industry of analytics. They've come up with a way to allow you to query data pretty much wherever it is. Maybe it's in your relational database, maybe it's in open formats like Iceberg. We're going to be talking a lot about Iceberg. I'm going to be attending their virtual event shortly, too. I think it's in about a week or two. And they've shaken up the market in significant ways. And Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Eric. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we were just discussing before the show, I've been in the data warehousing space for a long time, almost 25 years. It's hard to believe. And boy, have things changed. I mean, if you go back in 2001 timeframe, storage was expensive, processors were relatively slow, the pipes were fairly thin. So it was a different architecture. And these days, I mean, goodness gracious, we've had so many innovations in distributed systems, for example, and in being able to leverage data where it lives. And I think that's one of the keys to success in the future is being able to analyze data wherever it's sitting. And that was one of your early concepts, right? When you rolled this out. Please talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got me beat in the number of years department, but I've been in the space for 15 years, and even 15 years ago, it was very interesting. That was really the early days of Hadoop, kind of the first data lake, and a
Right.
lot of the concepts that are so important today were actually kind of pioneered back then. The idea of open formats like Parquet files and
Right.
Avro and ORC files, and storing that in cheap storage in a distributed file system and so forth. And then my first company was acquired by Teradata. I spent a few years there. And to me, one of the things that I realized was that despite Teradata being the industry leader, certainly at the time, not one of their customers actually had all of their data sitting in a classical data warehouse. That single source of truth in one proprietary EDW just wasn't actually achievable, and that you would always have data that lived outside of that. And even where you could centralize, it actually probably made more sense for you to centralize in more of a lake model. And around the same time as I was having these realizations, I discovered a open source project coming out of Facebook that was originally called Presto. It later became Trino, as it's known today, and decided to partner with the creators of this project while they were at Facebook. We started collaborating together between Teradata and Facebook to improve this project, make it really enterprise grade. And in 2017, left Teradata to form Starburst as the company behind this project. And the creators of Presto and Trino joined me from Facebook, and sort of from
Oh,
there
wow.
we went. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I'm the biggest fan of open source, and it was in fact back in 2005 when I was working for the Data Warehousing Institute that I did a bunch of research into it. And way back then, the Apache web server had just eclipsed the Microsoft web server as the number one web server. And I was like, oh, this is very interesting stuff. And I remember doing some research and doing some writing around the nexus of open source. And back then, of course, it was service oriented architecture. And I was thinking to myself, this is very interesting because ideally, if you have an SOA and you are using open source technologies, you should be able to rip and replace different component parts and build a composable architecture. And that doesn't sound like good news for the big Oracles and IBMs of the world. Of course, IBM, though, went all in on open source and really supported it. So they saw that vision. But wow, you look back in time now, and that was a very pivotal moment in this industry, right? When open source really took over. And now Apache is huge with all these different projects. That's pretty cool stuff,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. I mean, that was one of my key lessons from that period as well. I think, like, when you have an open option and a proprietary option, the open option is probably going to win, and it's better for customers. I mean, at the end of the day, I think customers get smart about these things, and they want to build architecture that can stand the test of time. Something that's truly future proof, and that's why it's so important to use open components, because they are generally modular and swappable, and you can adapt as things change. And at least from where we sit, that means, how you store your data can change. Maybe it's Oracle and Teradata on-prem today, and maybe it's, storing data in Iceberg and S3 and, MongoDB for your operational database in the future, right? And being able to have analytics across all of that, regardless of where it lives, is really core to our mission and providing customers that optionality.
Yeah, and that's so cool because it's always in the context that you understand a particular business problem. And as I'm sure you know, in the old days, if you will, of data warehousing, the whole idea was to pull data from source systems, put it into a relational model that then you can analyze it because we
Yep.
learned that these ERP systems and other production systems were not designed for analytics. They were designed for doing stuff, for transactions. So that's a
Yep.
different architecture, it's a different workflow. And the idea was, well, gosh, how can we query these things? Well, you do that by bringing it into a data warehouse, but by enabling analysis of data in many different systems and formats, you've obviated the big, huge need of all of this ETL, extract, transform, load, extract, transform, load. It's never going to go away. But I remember 17 years ago when we launched DM Radio, thinking to myself, this has got to stop. I mean, there's so much time, effort, and money spent moving data around. And we now have evidence to suggest that, you know what? 80% of that data isn't even really needed for your
Yes.
queries. So here
Yeah.
you're moving data that you don't even need to move. Well, that's silly in and of itself. But then when you can analyze it where it lives, now you've enabled the kind of rich context that is going to help answer business questions, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's fascinating that you're able to do that. Can you kind of get into the weeds a bit about how? So,
Sure.
obviously, you have connectors, ODBC, JDBC, traditional ways of connecting to data, but
Yep.
then you can sort of infer the format of the data and then transform that, I guess, in real time to be able to do analysis. Is that right? Walk us through how that whole process works.
Yeah. So, the way I like to explain it to folks is that Trino and Starburst are like the top half of a database, and what I mean by that is it's a database without storage. So we access the storage wherever that may be. It could be a traditional relational database, as you said. Maybe it's Oracle or Teradata or SQL Server or Postgres or MySQL or what have you. It could be a NoSQL database like Mongo. It could even be Kafka topics. It could be these open formats, which I think are a big deal. And I know we're going to spend some time talking about those in a bit, like Iceberg. But regardless of where you store it, what we're doing is we're essentially connecting to it, connecting to the catalog that has the metadata about how that data is laid out, and executing that query in memory in a distributed MPP architecture, massively parallel processing architecture. So it's scalable and super fast. And that's really, I think, what gave it its momentum as a project when it was first created at Facebook years ago, was the fact that this thing could really work at petabyte scale, with tons of concurrency and complexity around the types of analytics that you're trying to do, and do that in a performant and scalable way. And so today it's leveraged by some of the largest organizations in the world: LinkedIn, Netflix, Airbnb, large enterprises like Comcast, a ton of the big banks, and really using this at scale to do exactly as you described.
Yeah, and I mean, this whole issue of being able to analyze data where it lives, no matter what format it's in, like you said, a NoSQL database, Cassandra, MongoDB, a relational database, of course, MySQL, PostgreSQL. You know as well as I do, there are millions and millions of instances of these databases all around the globe. And the bigger the company gets, the more you're likely to have multiple different systems,
That's right.
maybe a call center system, a CRM,
Yep.
customer databases, all these different kinds of systems, which hitherto in the old days, you would have had to run extraction routines to pull the data out, load it into a particular schema. Well, instead, what you're doing is, like you say, you got that top half of the database and you don't care where it's stored. So
Yep.
now your business analyst can go, I want to be able to triangulate how much we're selling with our with our current supplies, with our customer needs, with what we're seeing on our website, all these different things, you can pull that together in a query and hit boom and
Yep.
get answers, right?
That's exactly right. And I think to your point, if you're a large enterprise, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 enterprise, that sort of Cambrian explosion of data sources is inherent. It's unavoidable. And in fact, there's a venture capitalist named Matt Turk at FirstMark Capital, who's,
Oh, I
I
know.
mean,
Yeah.
you've probably, where I'm going with this. He
Oh, yeah.
maintains this data landscape of all the different types of database systems and data sources basically that exist in our space. And he's updated it every year since back when I was doing my first startup 15 years ago. And so you can watch this progression. It never simplifies. It never seems to get smaller. It's just more and more and more data sources to the point where if you're a large organization, you have probably most of what's on that market map.
Yeah, and to your point, the world is getting more diverse. There are more
Yep.
tools, there are more data types, and there's value in those data types. There's value in them hills, as they say. There's gold in them hills, right? So
Yep.
to be able to have this abstraction layer above the panoply of data sources underneath, that's very powerful because again, otherwise you would have to manually go in and connect to this source, pull all that stuff out. Those pipelines break all the time. They're expensive, they're cumbersome. Typically, you lose some data when you're doing that. You can have all sorts of data quality issues occur. So instead, just leaving it where it is and being able to query it, and you still want observability. You still want to know when it's not coming through the way it's supposed to come through, things of this nature. That whole space has exploded as well. But the
Yep.
key is to be able to enable your professionals, your analysts, to ask whatever questions they want from data that's in any number of different sources, right?
Yep. Exactly. That's exactly right.
That's pretty cool stuff. And so give us some examples maybe of some of your clients, how they're able to pull together data from multiple different sources to see something and to understand something that's key to their business.
Sure. So one example that we've been working with Comcast for a number of years, actually. They've been a customer, geez, I don't know, probably maybe 6 years now, since the earliest days of the company's existence. And I always love chatting about some of their use cases because they're very relatable to a wide audience. We all watch TV in some form or fashion. And when they first started working with us, they had all of the classical billing data in a traditional enterprise data warehouse on-prem. And they had all the viewing behavior. Basically, every time you change that channel, every time you interact with that cable box, that was stored in a Hadoop data lake. And what they really wanted to do was be able to correlate the shows that you watch with how much you spend and do cross-sell and upsell based on your viewing behavior, which makes a ton of sense, but
Wow.
is a perfect example of one data set living in one data source, which is huge volume, right? Like all that event data, every time you change the remote, that needs to be in a data lake. I mean, you really wouldn't want to put that in a data warehouse. It'd cost you a fortune. But then they had all that classical billing data from decades of customer history in their data warehouse, and so they wanted to be able to combine that, join tables across these two systems, and we were able to deliver that value very quickly for them simply by being this abstraction layer and being able to join across these two data sources. Over time, what that let them do also is start a migration effort, a digital transformation effort, if you will, or a cloud transformation effort, maybe more precisely, and start to move some of that data into the cloud, into object storage like S3 or across multiple clouds, and leverage more of a data lake or lakehouse architecture for large portions of that data, where we become essentially the engine. And again, I know we'll get to this, but basically, when you combine Starburst or Trino and a open format like Parquet or Iceberg or Hudi or what have you, you essentially have a warehouse. It's just a open source warehouse with an open engine combined with an open format, which can now today, in today's world, give you the same performance and functionality that you might traditionally have gotten from a proprietary data warehouse.
Yeah, that's very interesting for lots of reasons. One, you don't want to hamstring your analysts. You want your analysts to be able to ask whatever questions are going to come to their mind, and you want them to be able to leverage new data sources quickly.
Yep,
right? Because there's an opportunity cost of doing the old model in that people just don't think outside the box. They think
that's
very
right.
much inside the box, and that greatly limits the kinds of questions you can ask, the kinds of analysis you can do. So what you've really done is open the doors to all kinds of exploration, right?
That's exactly right. You literally have the freedom to be curious and be able to get a response and iterate on that curiosity. So for exploratory analytics, it's truly a game changer to have everything at your fingertips. And in some of the large organizations that we work at, big banks and so forth, I'll tell you another anecdote. This one I can't say the name, but I'll just say one of the largest banks. The CEO used to call their data analytics team and say, "Hey, can you tell me, XYZ, how many times a day are our customers checking the banking app today, or what's our mortgage default risk, or what have you." And it used to take that team, a week or 2 weeks, and they'd say, "Hey, yeah, we'll get that answer for you." But now, by having connectivity to all those data sources, the analytics team can say, "Hey, just wait 1 second," and get the answer while he's on the phone.
That's
And
crazy.
that's a powerful powerful thing.
Well, it is amazing because, again, once you acclimate to being able to discover, I love that line you said, you have the freedom to be curious.
Yep.
That's very interesting because the mind is a very powerful thing. And I know that these analytical engines are very powerful, but human creativity is the key ingredient in all this stuff, right? You can have all
Yes.
this data, all this analysis, reports, dashboards, everything you want. It's a human being that's going to have to really look at that and map it all to the business and the plans and where you want to go. And these days, you have to be able to change plans pretty quickly. I mean, I've
Yes.
been in business myself for, on and off, self-employed for 25 years in two long instances, and I've never seen a more dynamic marketplace than what we have today.
Yeah.
I mean, especially for mid-sized businesses, but even for big businesses, you have to be able to know what's happening, where's the money coming from, where are the expenses coming from, where's the margin coming from, what are the people doing. All these things are crucial to understand and be able to pivot, because
Yep.
otherwise you have to lay people off, and a lot of times we've seen a lot of layoffs these days. It's very difficult to recover from that stuff. I mean,
Yep.
just knowing what people were working on is half the battle. Then being able to reallocate that work to someone else is another whole half of the battle. And then by the time you've done that, well, guess what? The market's changed again. So the long-winded point I'm making here is that it's really important to be able to analyze your data, to understand what it's telling you, no matter which system it's coming from. And folks, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to Justin Borgman, co-founder and CEO of Starburst, a very cool company that is doing amazing things with data analytics. And we were just talking at the break, Justin, about COVID, and now COVID came along and really forced everyone to pay attention to their processes, to their workflows, to their data. You better understand what's happening. And of course, all these behaviors changed. And that's one fascinating aspect of the industry of business in general that I found so curious, because everyone tells me this is the case. And what happened is you have all these algorithms that were designed to optimize sales and marketing and operations in different aspects of a business, but they're predicated on old behavior of how people acted before COVID. Then COVID hits and all that stuff went out the window. So you had to come up with new ideas, new ways of doing things. And that's where analytics plays a crucial role, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, we live in volatile, dynamic times, and being able to react and understand how changes in the world around you are impacting your business and drive strategy in accordance with that is so important. And that time to insight is critical in driving that. And I think COVID's a fantastic example, right? All of a sudden, overnight, we started ordering our own groceries and doing our banking online, and those mobile apps, became so important. Delivery services became so important, and calculating that incorrectly, could have huge impact. I'll tell you a quick story here in the Boston area. One of our great tech success stories is a company called Toast, which has basically reinvented the point of sale system in restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this moment in the very beginning of COVID where they thought, "Oh my God, our business is screwed," basically.
Toast.
And yeah, Toast, yeah, no pun intended. And so, tragically, they let go of half their company. It was like 1,000 people were suddenly laid off. It ended up being the case that their business actually ended up growing dramatically during that period, but they couldn't see it yet that COVID was actually putting a lot of restaurants out of business, but creating the opportunity to create new ones. And as new ones were created, the first thing that somebody decides when they open up a restaurant is which point of sale system do I want to buy? And so, that prospect of selling to legacy restaurants, existing restaurants, and getting them to change is much, much harder for them than selling to a brand new restaurant. And so it ended up being this huge boon to their business.
Wow.
But they just couldn't see that at the time, and weren't able to react early in that. And unfortunately, a lot of people lost their job early. And now, Toast is a huge success story, public company, great business.
Well, yeah, and being able to pull data from systems like that, for example, is very useful. So, especially if you've got 10, 20, 30 stores around the country, being able to analyze the data coming in through a system like that, like Toast Point of Sale, is great for supply chain. It's great for planning. It's great for, understanding what mixture of products to offer in your stores. I mean, a lot of people don't realize how much work goes into rolling out a new product at a company like that, like at a Chipotle with their brisket or something like that. A
Yep.
lot of work goes into that, understanding what is the sourcing, what is the pricing, how are we going to be able to pull this off. That's what analytics is here for. And because you have this abstraction layer that allows you to dig into any number of different data sources, you've greased the tracks to that kind of analysis, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, because speed matters these days. You have to know, and you have to be able to fail fast forward, I think is the real key. Try
Yep.
something. If it doesn't work, know that it doesn't work, move on. No sacred cows in business, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's dive into this open table format stuff. We talked about open source earlier in the show and how
Yep.
amazed I am still about the number of open source projects. We mentioned Hadoop briefly, and I watched that whole evolution. I was a
Yep.
little bit skeptical, to be honest. I'm like, I'm not sure if this is one knife that's going to solve all these problems. And MapReduce, it's great
Yep.
for indexing the web. It had a very good use case. That's why it was designed, right?
Hmm.
But there were security issues, there was overhead, there were network issues, all kinds of different things came into play. But the point is, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about distributed systems. We learned a lot about file storage, for example.
Yep.
And now we have these interesting developments in file formats and table formats. There's Parquet, right, which has
Yep.
been adopted as a standard, I think. And part of
Yep.
the reason, real quick, is because it has that little analytical box at top, right, in the beginning of the file. It has a little area that's designed to give metrics on what's in that file, which is great for
Mhm.
analytics, right? Do you know much about Parquet?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think that's one of the most important, creations of that Hadoop era that you were describing, maybe 15 years ago. When I first got involved back then, Parquet didn't exist, and the query performance was also exceptionally slow. MapReduce itself was exceptionally slow, and the
Right.
file formats that you were reading from were also very slow to read from. And so Parquet was a columnar format, first and foremost, in terms of how the data was laid out, which allowed for much better performance. And mimics, as you say, like a lot of the capabilities of a traditional database. And I think, to your earlier point, Hadoop was a test ground of a lot of new concepts that I think
Right.
have been perfected now 10, 15 years later. And this is really like, the Lake 2.0, if you will, where every little component has been upgraded. In the early days, it was Hive or maybe Impala if you were a Cloudera customer. Today, it might be, Trino and Starburst on the query engine layer. And similarly, while it was, Parquet for a long time, you can now leverage Iceberg or other formats like Iceberg. There's Hudi, there's Delta. We can talk about some of the pros and cons of each if you'd like. But, these really allow you to do updates and deletes, which is sort of like finishing the last mile on the file format piece. So you can now modify the data. If you have a GDPR use case where you need to take somebody out of a mailing database or mailing list, if you will, because they've opted out, you can now do that. And historically, you couldn't do that with data lakes. They were append only. And so it was a real pain in the butt to try to actually modify your lake. But with Iceberg, you can do that. You can do time travel. You get all this new functionality that is much more historically associated with a proprietary data warehouse like Teradata or Snowflake.
Hmm, that's very interesting. It's another abstraction layer, right? What was the on one of these shows years ago, someone joked that in IT we always think that one more abstraction layer will solve all our problems, and it kind of does. I mean, at least it
Yep.
solves many problems, right? Then you'd have to do all the mappings and make sure that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's. But
Yep.
nonetheless, that is incredibly important. And it's a great example you just gave too, being able to delete something, say, okay,
Yep.
get it out of there. This person is unsubscribed. We don't want to hit them anymore.
Yep.
It most people would think, oh, well, can't you do that? Not in that old format, no. But now in
Yep.
this format, you can. So we're always making sacrifices to achieve new ends in this business. The key is to kind of understand what do we need to keep, what can we let go of, how can we solve these problems? And these abstraction layers are very powerful at being able to solve many, many problems in one layer, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're exactly right. And the history of computing is a lot of abstraction on top of abstraction, right? Like, thank goodness we're not deciding exactly where to write every bit and byte to a hard drive anymore, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
yep.
Well, there are lots of things happening. So how would a starburst work with Iceberg, for example, in a client situation? How does that all come together?
Yeah, so this is what's got me really excited right now currently is that we've seen first and foremost widespread adoption of the Iceberg format and tremendous momentum there. We see so many customers are looking at it because it is open, it is independent. Number of vendors have embraced it.
Yeah, right.
Even Snowflake is embracing it, which is interesting on its own right. But the industry has really rallied behind this format, and I think it becomes the de facto standard. It becomes the new parquet, and in the sense of its ubiquity is our view. And one of the reasons that's exciting to us is because when Iceberg was first created at Netflix, it was created to go pair with Trino or Presto as it was first known. Now today, Netflix, a huge Trino user, uses that with Iceberg. So that pairing of Trino and Iceberg goes back to its earliest beginnings. And one of the reasons was that Netflix was a big data warehouse customer of my former employer. And they
Hmm.
were trying to figure out how can we really do the full functionality of data warehousing in a open warehouse, essentially, open warehousing model. And that was one of the motivations for the creation of this format. And it's been very successful. So the combination of Trino and Iceberg is something that we see a large portion of the internet companies already embracing. Again, LinkedIn, Netflix, many others, Apple, and so forth. And we call this the Ice House. The Iceberg
I
warehouse.
like that.
And I think that's very exciting. For those that are going to centralize data, we would say centralize it in an ice house. And then you can also leverage us, of course, to query the other data sources you have as well.
That's very interesting. You know what also excites me, and I've seen this now several times, is people in these very large organizations in the data teams dealing with massive amounts of data. I mean, goodness
Yeah.
gracious, Netflix. Think about
Yeah.
how much data that they're dealing with. It's a tremendous amount and relatively unwieldy data too. A lot of machine data, but a lot of user data. So not your traditional types of just transactions buying this and that. I mean, they have that too, but they have all these other things they have to manage. Well, what's interesting is how you see these diasporas every so often where people will come up with an idea in this organization, then spring out and start their own thing. It started with Yahoo. I think it was the first big one back in like the early aughts, basically. A whole bunch of people sprang out of there
Yep.
and they founded, I mean, 40 different companies. And that became the Hadoop ecosystem, right? Because
Yep.
first there was Hadoop, HDFS, then you had this whole ecosystem around it to do
Totally.
all the stuff like governance and analytics and different things like that. And now we're seeing it come out. People come out of Google, people come out of LinkedIn. That's where Kafka came from. People come out of Facebook and Meta. It's really interesting, right? Because they were at the coal face, as they would say,
Right.
hacking through these incredibly difficult challenges. And then they went and they rolled their own, like Cassandra. I mean, that came out of Facebook too, right?
Yep. I'm so with you on that, Eric. And these are sort of some of my own personal truisms that I've learned over the years is open is always is generally better than proprietary, and that I
Right.
think the markets move in that direction. And B, if you want to see what the future looks like, look at the internet companies, because generally they're on the frontier, and
Right.
I think architectures start to evolve to mimic how those folks deal with things, because they're always ahead of the game in terms of scale and performance, and really pushing the limits of those systems.
Yeah, and then to open source stuff. I mean, how cool is that, right?
Yeah.
For the folks at LinkedIn to roll out Kafka, open source it, make it an Apache project so that do-it-yourselfers can go grab the code and stand things up. Now you're going to have to maintain it, and that takes a lot of time and effort, right? So like there are pluses and minuses to using open source stacks, and there are security issues we've learned about. Recently, there was that one case of a developer who caught some little potential hack, and that was saved us all from a lot of trouble, I think. But
Yep.
nonetheless, I think you're right that openness fosters innovation. It also builds trust, right?
Totally. Absolutely. Yep.
And that's really important because especially in industries that have regulations, you want to have an audit trail. You want to be able to explain what this thing is doing. Black boxes are not so good. ChatGPT was open, OpenAI. Now it's not open. Now it's a black box. So these things are issues we have to worry about. And I think that by and large, the black boxes are kind of over for big business. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, again, over time, where there's an open alternative, that's where people are going to want to graduate, for all the reasons that you describe. Even at, let's say, JPMC, Jamie Dimon talks about, he's never going to use one cloud. He's going to have four clouds, the fourth, I guess, being his own on-prem. He doesn't want to choose one vendor. He doesn't want to be locked into anything. I mean, and this is like a banking CEO who has the I guess, foresight to think about his technology strategy in a similar risk management way. And I think, Jamie's just been a fantastic risk manager in all aspects of his business. But, just another great example of, someone even at his stature thinking about, I think, a lot of these principles you're speaking of.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, they are at the front end of innovation as well. I mean, they kind of have to be because you have to protect that money, first of all. So it's all going to be focused on governance and security and compliance and transactional integrity. You can't lose your money, but they're also very forward thinking in terms of how to use analytics to
Yep.
understand customer behavior. And you talked about risk too. I mean, what a complex field that is. Had a whole past life moderating webinars for a group called GARP. That's the Global Association of Risk Professionals, or as I call them, the de facto Illuminati, because they're like chief risk officers for every central bank in the world, right? And these folks are like, have a hard eye on the market, on what's happening. When COVID went down, they were the first to figure out we got to do something about this. And just
Yep.
real quick, I had a guy from a healthcare company on the show. I guess about maybe 9 months after COVID struck, and he said that in the first 6 months after COVID hit, they knocked out 5 years of digital transformation because they had to, and they
Yeah.
knew they had to. And so when the pressure mounts and you have to act, amazing things can happen. And it was all the stuff we talked about at COVID, of disparate workforce. You got to understand your workflows, all that fun stuff. But folks, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking all things data and analytics with Justin Boardman, co-founder and CEO of Starburst. I love your company name, by the way. You gotta love
Thank you.
Starburst. It's good stuff. I
We have
love
a lot of fun with that. Yeah. For
and
those of you
really,
watching the video, at least you can see the background.
yes,
Yeah.
one of my favorite words in Spanish is estrella, the
Yeah.
star. Estrella fugaz, the shooting star. Right? It's cool
Nice.
stuff. Yeah, but let's talk about so the stuff you're doing with Iceberg, and I understand you have a great team member who has just joined you. But
Yep.
what you're doing on ingest, right? Because ingest has always fascinated me. You point your connectors to data sources and pull all that stuff in. How can you do that efficiently, fast?
Yep.
It's just really important to be able to do that because the longer you wait, the longer you're waiting to do some analysis. Tell us about that.
Yeah, exactly. So building on that idea of a icehouse architecture, really what we're going for is to create a full end-to-end experience that is, just like a traditional data warehouse, but leveraging a open format at its core. And again, that's what an Icehouse is. It's a open lake house leveraging Iceberg at its core. And that means, addressing a few areas, one being data ingestion, both streaming and batch, turning that data into Iceberg tables. A lot of people just, don't know how to do that. They've never had to do that before. So how do you create those tables? There's the governance aspects of access control, lineage, auditing. There's also just the management of those tables. There's something called compaction, where you want to compact a lot of small files into larger files to get better performance. And so that's just kind of a utility that needs to take place for performance optimization. There's retention and snapshot expiration. There's capacity management, increasing or decreasing your size of your cluster for performance to match the demand, and being able to do that elastically as well. So these are all the things that we've been working on from the Starburst side. You're absolutely right. We just hired Carl Steinbach. He was a very early member in the Iceberg community. He's been working on Iceberg since 2018. He's a PMC member, and actually was one of the co-founders of Tabular, which is an Iceberg company. And we're super excited to have him here working with us on continuing to drive this roadmap. And one of the reasons he joined is, I think, exactly what we believe, which is that open formats belong with open engines, and this is really the stack for giving you a end-to-end open warehouse experience.
I got to tell you, I love this ice house concept, right? I mean, I've been around a long time, as we were talking about data warehousing, then data lakes. I will tell you, I was a little bit concerned in the early days of the data lake. I'm like, are we making the same mistake again of thinking we can store all this data in one
Yep.
discrete location? Because data is going to live wherever it lives, and moving it is always going to take time and effort. There's this concept of data gravity, right?
Yep.
Of course, data doesn't have actual gravity, but the point is, in a conceptual way, it kind of does, because you have to pull it out of somewhere, push it to some other location, land it there, make sure it all lands properly. And again, this whole federated worldview, I remember the first time I learned about Apache Arrow, I was like,
Mhm.
oh, wow, that sounds very interesting. So enabling the federated queries, I think in memory was their
Mhm.
whole vision with Apache Arrow. And again, another Apache project, right?
Yep.
So here you have the best minds who come together and in an open way develop technology that is open source, right? Because open leads to future connectivity, it leads to future collaboration. It's not a closed door. Proprietary is a closed door.
Yep.
And this is what I saw way back when in like 2000, 5 time frame or something, when I'm like, wait a minute, this open source stuff is pretty cool. What's going to stop it? And things have happened. I won't name names, but there have been some movements to truncate open source. But I think the cat's out of the bag. What do you think?
I totally agree. Totally agree. And there was another point that you referenced there on sort of centralization versus decentralization. Our answer is both. Like you're going to have some centralization, and in those cases leverage open formats like Iceberg and the Icehouse model. And you're going to have other cases where you're going to want to keep the data where it is and query it there directly, and that's where federated queries adds value. And so we think it's a both, not an either or an or. And absolutely, you want to be leveraging open components wherever you possibly can in that stack to give you that flexibility.
Right. Well, and who likes lock-in, right? Nobody wants lock-in.
Yep.
I saw one of the big cloud providers, was it Google maybe, that lowered their egress fees. Did you see this recently? It was like,
Yeah.
what's happening there? It's these, again, no one likes lock-in, right? There's no
Yep.
CTO that wants lock-in. There's no CFO that wants lock-in. Nobody wants that. And open formats allow you to stay open and to mix and match, to bring some new technology. Because I mean, you mentioned the term future proof. Of course, that's the name of our show, or our TV show, Future Proof. It's really important these days to leave doors open, because amazing new things come down the pike. I mean, Iceberg, I don't think too many people saw Iceberg coming 5, 6 years ago.
That's right.
And here it is. And I know for sure that all the other big guns are like, oh, we have to talk to Iceberg. Yeah, you probably should,
Yep.
because it's just, it's taken off, right? There was Hootie, Delta Lake, and Iceberg are the three
Yep.
different versions you could use. And of
Yep.
course, Delta Lake is proprietary for Databricks. Hootie was for someone else. I can't remember who launched
Hootie
Hootie.
came out of Uber,
Out of Uber,
and
right?
there's a company behind that one called One House. Hootie's interesting. It just hasn't gained as much momentum,
Right.
and sometimes it's just the most popular wins, right? And I think Iceberg is that. But Hootie's a great format too, and we do support all three. Back to that point, like optionality is what creates that future proof ability.
Right.
Um, and then allows you to kind of double down where the market moves. And I think in this case, that's Iceberg.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And getting that momentum, getting enough developers focused on something, that's one of the keys too. Maybe we should dive into that for the developer world, right? Because I heard a great stat that every year, like the number of developers is growing by some astronomical number, which means there are new developers all over the place every year. And so, how do you attract those folks to work on your stuff to understand your architecture, your languages, your vision? That's all important, right? And I've seen this develop over the last, I'd say 7 to 10 years. Software companies not just trying to get clients, but working very
Yeah.
hard to get developers to pay
Yes.
attention to them to work in their communities, right? Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think developers like to work on open source, frankly. It
Right.
actually allows them to not only, build their resume on technologies that they know are going to be useful wherever they go in their career, but also if they choose to participate in those communities and contribute, they're building a different kind of resume on GitHub,
Right.
and that's really valuable to them.
Right.
And so I think you're absolutely right. I think this is one of the secrets, by the way, of Facebook's success from an engineering organization perspective. They've always attracted tremendous talent, and I think one of the reasons is that they have a very open source centric culture that allows their developers to participate in a variety of projects and really become almost like famous, if you will, within those projects. And that's certainly the history of my co-founders creating Presto and Trino when they were there, and so many other great open technologies that have come out of companies like that, like Kafka at LinkedIn and others.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing. And developers are the front lines these days. They are building the products that you use when your products are web-based, software as a service, or you're selling all sorts of things using the web to sell all that stuff. Understanding all that, you need developers. And you want your developers to be motivated. You want them to be interested in things. And you made an excellent point about how GitHub is like your resume. It's a meritocracy. So you're not just saying you can do stuff, you're saying, look at the stuff I've done. This is how it works. And this is just such a white hot space. It's a great place to be for a developer working with data, working with the unique nature of any business. I think that's probably the exciting thing, right? Is that every company is different. Every business has its own DNA, its own way of doing things, its own people, of course. Business
Yep.
is a bunch of people. It's people, data, systems, technology, vision, where things are going. And what Starburst is doing, and the other people in this industry, to be fair, you are providing the mechanisms of action for inventing new things, for trying new things, for deploying new things. And it's going to be all about efficiency in this economy. I mean, people say it's the information economy. I think it's more like the execution economy these days
Mm.
because the information is everywhere. The data is all over the place. The question is, what do you do with it? How quickly can you make use of it? And that's really what we're talking about with these federated queries and these
Yep.
distributed systems. Make use of it quickly such that you can ideate, create, test, market, and then redo, reinvent, try something different. It's all going to be very fluid in the next few years. And the companies that manage their data best are going to have the best chances of victory. But podcast bonus segments coming up next, folks. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, time for the podcast bonus segment with Justin Borgman of Starburst, CEO and co founder. And Starburst Galaxy is your cloud based system. Like many vendors, you started off with an on prem version and you realized that SaaS is probably the future. So now you've got Starburst Galaxy, which I think you said is the easy button for the ice house.
That's right.
That's pretty cool. So up in the cloud, 'cause this is metadata management largely, right? Up in the cloud, you would then point to your different data sources and it pulls the metadata up in there, and then you can kind of rationalize and reconcile it and work your magic. Is that about right?
Yeah, you absolutely can connect to all of your different data sources. You can query them directly. You have the ability to hook up your favorite BI tool or query editor or Python notebooks or whatever the case may be, and interact with that data directly. And as you said, it's the easy button. We try to make this, super sophisticated distributed MPP engine as easy to use. With as few knobs to turn as possible, to make it really low maintenance for you from a operational perspective. We also have built in a lot of these features we were talking about earlier on the Icehouse topic of streaming ingest and creating iceberg tables and doing compaction and data profiling and data lineage and creating curated data products off the data that you have. You can do all of that within this Galaxy experience. And you touched on in the earlier segment the importance of efficiency. One element of efficiency is cost performance efficiency. And compared to cloud data warehouses, we are roughly 1/3 the cost of a traditional cloud data warehouse. So you can save a bunch of money leveraging this open lakehouse model or icehouse as we call it, and Galaxy makes it easy to do that.
Now, I kind of hear some hints of governance in there. I mean, if you can access the systems and manage metadata and things of that nature, is governance in the roadmap? Can you do data governance to some extent?
Yeah, so access control has always been actually part of our strategy, at least as a company. So we built in fine-grained role-based access controls, many years ago, maybe 5 years ago. More recently, in the last couple, we've actually upgraded that to attribute-based access control as well. And so you can tag your data and leverage that for your access controls. But also, we've even added the ability to sort of automate tagging of data. And this is where we actually incorporate some AI in the product itself, where we can automatically tag PII data to help you out in your governance strategy. By no means do you have to leverage that. You should also be checking all of your data, but it helps with that process. And again, very fine grained. So row level, column level, data masking, query auditing, all of that's built into the platform. And it's enforced across all the data that you connect to. So not just your iceberg tables, although of course that's a common use case, but also across, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, whatever data sources you may be connecting to.
Hmm. That's very interesting. I mean, I think it sounds like a wonderful way to have this management layer because then doesn't matter where you are. You could be on the road, you could be at your home office, you could be anywhere. You just log into your cloud-based system. You can see this whole environment and you can run your queries from that environment, right? I mean, you have to do your connectors to your various
Yep.
systems on-prem or whatever they are. And see that this is what I think is so exciting is being able to connect to SaaS sources, on-prem sources, whatever the case may be, from one marshaling area, then to be able to build queries, ask questions across this whole environment, and under the covers, Starburst Galaxy does that, right?
That's exactly right. Yep, that's exactly right. And for the power user, there's even a built-in query editor. So you can literally just open it up and start using it. Of course, if customers prefer their favorite tool, maybe Tableau, Power BI, Looker, what have you, you can use that as well. But that's exactly right. All that power is at your fingertips.
This is wild woolly stuff, folks. Well, we've been talking to Justin Borgman, CEO and co-founder of Starburst. Hop online to starburst.io to learn more about those folks. And it's moving fast, folks. I like the ice house, the open lake house. I think the ice house sounds good. Good stuff. Talk to you next time. Send me an email if you want to be in the show. Info@insideanalysis.com. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.